I just recently completed an upgrade to Ubuntu 22.04, upgrading from 18.04, which I installed back in 2018. I did not do an upgrade though, I did a completely new install. I have my operating system installed on an NVMe disk, and I popped that disk out and put in a new disk and did a fresh install of Ubuntu 22.04. My home directory is stored on a separate SSD, so when I installed the new version of Ubuntu, it popped up and it saw my home directory and it had all my settings there, so I didn't have to re-input all the settings. The one thing that did not come across was the virtual machines from KVM. So I had to actually do an export of the settings for my virtual machines before the upgrade. And then after the upgrade, which is now, I'm just going to re-import them into the new machine. Now I've got the later version of KVM that runs on Ubuntu 22.04, and I've put a few virtual machines on here already. This one's from a Fedora machine, for example. And this newer version has some options here. The newer version will actually show you the XML, which is the code that defines the virtual machine. So in the XML code, you define what type of memory the virtual machine has. And if I scroll down here, when you look at the type of disk that is on that machine, it shows you the file that actually holds the image for the virtual machine. In my case, it was on a third drive, which is a mounted drive, and it stores all of my images. So I still have this 3 terabyte drive that I keep all my virtual machine disk on, and I still have it mounted in /mount. So what I had to do prior to doing the actual update, I created a backup folder. What did I call it? I put it in KVMs. And I exported all the settings for the virtual machines that I have. Now this file is an XML file which just defines the settings of the machine, and then the QCOW file is the disk that the virtual machine uses. I was looking at the Fedora site, if I can find it, and first dump, yeah, that was it right there. And the format of the command that you use to actually dump the XML is virsh, VIRSH, dump XML, and then the name of the file. Now that's just going to dump it to your screen, so you need to pipe it out to a file. So if I do a virsh list right now, I think it's dash all. These are all the virtual machines I currently have on this box. So if I wanted to look at the XML, let's look at the one for the Fedora 22. I would do a virsh dump. Let me clear the screen so we can get back up top. And what that will do is that will just dump all the XML out to the screen. So what I want to do is I want to put that in a file, so I'll redirect it and I'll call it file.xml. So this is a dump of the XML, which shows how much memory I have defined for the VM. And we go on down some more. It shows you the path to where the image file is located. And you go on down some more. If I can find the interface. All right, here's the interface. It defines the interface, and it defines the interface on the host. Now, this interface has to exist on the new host. If it does not, you can come in and you can modify this XML before you actually bring it back into the KVM. So you can modify this XML, and if you want to change the path where the disk is stored, for example, if you had it in a different path, you could change the path within this XML file and then import it back into KVM. So if I do a ls, these are all the VMs that I had on the old system. And I know that this one is one of my Red Hat boxes. So I want to bring that VM back into the new KVM that's running on Ubuntu 2204. And the command for that is verse define, and then the name of the XML file. Oops, I did it twice. XML. And I hit enter. And it tells me the domain is defined. That means it defined it, but it didn't start it. So I'm going to close that, and I'm going to go to the virtual machine manager. And there's the machine that we just imported back in with that define command. But before I start it, I'm going to go to the properties of it. And you can see the settings are here, and it's got the, where we got here. This one had 2 NICs on it, and it was pointing to ETH4. ETH4 is still on my machine. This one, now this one has a virtual network that is isolated. This is basically an internal network. So what I did is before I actually started the install, I went in here to virtual networks and I redefined this isolated network. So if something is in the XML, it has to be on the KVM machine for it to import correctly. And this new version of KVM handles the interfaces differently for some reason. I'm going to go ahead and start it just so you can see. And there was one error that I got with the CPU, and I should probably get it here too. Okay, yeah. It says the CPU is incompatible with the host CPU. And I figured out that all I have to do is go under CPU there, and under this model, just set it to hypervisor default. And I later found out that if I looked under the man page for verse, and I look for the dump XML, that one, that one. If I looked under the dump XML, there's an option here that says update-CPU. Now, if I had known about this when I was doing these backups, if I would have added this --update CPU, it would have put in the appropriate lines within the XML file so that when I do the import, it would automatically pick up the correct CPU. But I didn't know that ahead of time, so I just have to deal with that error as I'm importing. So I go into the details and set it to hypervisor default and hit apply. I know that this NIC needs to be bridged instead of a MAC type. And I hit apply. And that one's correct. I want them as vert.io. I'm sorry. I set them as vert.io. Vert.io is a little bit faster. I've got a previous video on that, and you can see the link on how it's done. So once I've made those changes, I'm going to go ahead and start this VM. It says unable to add bridge, operation not supported. What does that mean? Oh, that's because my interface name is different. It's not ETH4. Let me see what it is. Yeah, like I was saying, this new version of KVM handles networking differently. So I had to put my Ethernet 4 interface in a bridge and assign an IP address for it. So I have to reference this nm-bridge1 instead of ETH4 as my interface. So I need to put that there. That's not it. That's not it either. I do that. I need to do nm-bridge1 and hit apply. And then I need to go and start it. All right, now it starts and it boots up, and it should come up with the same config. And I normally just go through and I check those settings before I start them just to make sure everything's okay. I believe this one had a GUI and the other two did not have a GUI. So if I go back and look at the machine manager, see that VM is there and it's running. It comes up and it's got an IP address. And I should be able to log on as root. And these haven't been up for a while, so I'll do a DNF make cache, do a DNF update. That's going to tell it to go out to Red Hat and update any packages that are available for update or anything like that. But while I'm waiting, I'm going to go and do the second one. The second server was this one. It's also a Red Hat server. And remember, that command just defines the domain. It doesn't start it or do anything. So when I go back to look at my virtual machine manager, there's the second one that I just imported with a define command. And again, I'm going to go in and look at the settings for it before I start it. I'm going to change the CPU to hypervisor default. And you have to hit apply after you move between screens. I'm going to set that to bridge 1. Leave it at vert.io, set that to bridge. Hit apply. Vert.io, and that's okay. So I'm going to start that one. And they boot up basically the same way they were before. So I'm going to let that one go ahead and boot up. While I'm waiting for that one, I'll go and do the third one, which was this KVM here. And since I'm here, I'll go ahead and do another one. This is a VM that's running Ubuntu, and it's running the Ubiquity controller, which controls my Wi-Fi. Okay, so back on my server 2, I'm going to log on as root. And I'm going to do the same thing over there. I'm going to do the DNF update. And remember, see, there's the server 3 that I imported. There's the Unify that I imported. So I'm going to go to server 3. I'm going to tell it to use the default CPU. Oh, I said default, hypervisor default. Okay, that's fine. That's the default it picked. Bridge. DG1. Leave it at vert.io. Same thing for this one. Leave it at vert.io. It's ready. I'm going to make this window smaller. I'm going to start that one as well. All right, number 2 is ready to do its update, so I hit yes. And the last one is the Unify controller, which is here. Gonna go ahead and do the same thing, CPU, hypervisor default. Where is there's my card. It was a bridge device also. I'm going to change that to mm-bridpe1. Leave it at vert.io. And I'm going to start that one. So Unify is starting. I'm going to go into the Red Hat Server 3. Oh, server 2 is hanging on something. Server 2 is waiting for the network to be configured. Oh, that's Unify. Okay, the Unify one is up. I don't think I can log in as root to this one. Let's go. I'm looking for the IP address for this one, which is, and you can't see it right there because now it's set to scale. If I set it full screen, I want this 172.22 address. And to see if my controller actually came back, I would go to HTTPS. And it's port 8443. Certificate, blah, 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 blah. Okay, there's my Unify screen. I go in as admin. Same password is there. Now, it doesn't see my switch yet, but it sees the access point. Where do you got? Devices. They should go for clients, yeah. And there's all the clients that are on the Wi-Fi. So that virtual machine came back up correctly, and now I can control my Wi-Fi settings again. So that's fine. And I'm going to continue to just go down that list and restore all my VMs that I had before. I just have to remember that as I do the define command and it adds them to the virtual machine manager here, I have to check the settings on each one, especially for the network. For some reason, this new KVM handles the bridging of the devices differently. In the old version, you could say, I want to bridge my Ethernet 4 interface, and it would bridge it. But in this newer version, it's saying the actual interface has to already be a bridge. It's not going to do it for you for some reason. I don't know the technical reason behind that, but that's just kind of how I figured out how it works. And there's a simple instruction on how to take your VMs that you have running under KVM from one machine and put them on another machine. Just remember, you can go into that XML file and you can change the path of the disk image file. So if you change the path on the new machine, you have to change it in the XML. And then remember, before you start the actual VM, check the settings for networking and also the settings for the CPU. Thanks for watching. Go ahead and hit that like button, and I'll see you in the next video.